Listen and believe. Listen and believe. If a man is falsely accused of rape, he could learn something from it. Well, what do you think this man, whose conviction was overturned, learned from being in prison for 2 years? Well, what do you think he learned from his experience? This is in Stars and Stripes, and it's actually all over the internet. I'll put a bunch of links below. West Point cadets rape conviction reversal panned by victim advocates. Are you surprised? If a woman accuses you of something, you're automatically guilty. And if the court doesn't find you to be guilty, well, that's because the justice system is corrupted by the rape culture. Isn't that pretty much what feminists have to say about this kind of stuff? A military appeals court reversal of a West Point cadet's rape conviction. And get this now, guys. Remember, we live in a rape culture where 90% of rapists never spend a day in jail. That's what we're told. This guy was sentenced to 21 years in prison. The reversal has outraged sexual assault victim advocates who say the decision is filled with victim blaming and antiquated notions about rape. A 3-judge panel of the U.S. Army Court of Criminal Appeals on Monday ordered Cadet. He was to be released from confinement and reinstated at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. He had been convicted in 2017 of 3 counts of sexual assault after a 4-day trial by a jury of 6 West Point faculty and staff. He had served 2 years in prison. His appeal had focused on reducing his sentence, but the appeals panel, which had 2 females and 1 male, opted to throw out the charges after reviewing the evidence and finding it, quote, factually insufficient. The cadet had been charged with raping a female classmate in her sleeping bag during summer field training in 2016. He testified the encounter was consensual and that both of them had tried to be quiet so nearby squad members wouldn't take notice. She testified that she froze in a fetal position when she awoke to find the man assaulting her. Here's what she said. She awoke in the night to find the man really close to me. His body was against mine, she testified. I just froze. I didn't know what to do. I really wanted to move. In my head, I was screaming, but my body wouldn't move. I was like a deer in the headlights. The judges found it implausible that the woman would stay quiet while being raped, and that the man would be so brazen as to do this and expect to get away with it. Quote, it is hard to conclude beyond a reasonable doubt that appellant could complete the charged offenses without cooperation or detection, the panel wrote. It is even harder to conclude beyond a reasonable doubt that appellant would anticipate that the woman would not make any reflexive noise or movements upon being awakened, which would have alerted multiple others to the criminal activity. In other words, all she had to do was scream, and there'd be 10 army dudes coming to her rescue. They were all camped outside. They were all sleeping in sleeping bags right there. The judges said their doubt about whether the woman was raped was increased because the man hadn't threatened the woman or taken steps to silence her, such as covering her mouth to prevent an outcry. Furthermore, the court wrote, appellant left his semen on the women's bivvy cover, and there is no evidence that he tried to remove his semen. U.S. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, a New York Democrat and running for president, who has campaigned publicly against sexual assault in the military. I don't think anyone is campaigning for sexual assault in the military, dear writer. That's a really bad sentence. Senator Gillibrand said Friday the decision sends a terrible message to survivors. Of course it does, doesn't it? I am extremely concerned that the panel's reasoning reflects an outdated understanding about the nature of sexual assault and may deter reporting by survivors, it is said every single freaking time, isn't it? But yet no one ever says how that would happen. Retired Colonel Don Christensen, a former Air Force chief prosecutor, who is now president of the advocacy group Protect Our Defenders, said the decision, quote, sends a hugely negative message to discouraged survivors at a time when reports of sexual assault and harassment in the military are rising. It's an offensively bad decision filled with victim blaming, a poor understanding of the impact of sexual assault on survivors, and an incredibly stupid analysis of whether perpetrators will commit offenses against people they know. They say the victim didn't act the way they thought she should act, that she basically didn't make enough noise. But victims often freeze. That's one of the reasons rapists get away. Because of the impact of trauma. They also doubted his guilt because the victim knew who he was and could report it. But well over half the rapes that occur in the military are acquaintance rapes. So there's so much to unpack here, guys. Number one, this woman and this man and these troops, they can be called into battle. Is this woman going to freeze up if some bad guy comes up and tries to stab her to death? If that's the case, then what's the point of her being in the army? These are physically strong, highly trained members of the military. And we are to believe that this man somehow got in her sleeping bag and was rubbing up against her junk, and she just froze. Are these the leaders we want in our army to defend us from bad guys? What is she going to do in a situation? She's in a machine gun nest and she's getting shot at. What is she going to freeze? I mean, certainly rape is a traumatic event, but this woman has been trained to manage traumatic events. She's a freaking officer in the United States Army. I don't know, guys. All she had to do was say something, and there'd be a bunch of army guys going to help her. That's all she had to do. This wasn't in the woods somewhere where they were by themselves, no one around, and he did whatever he did to her. They were there sleeping on the ground with a bunch of other troops, and she didn't freaking say a word. I call bullshit. And so did the judge, the panel that released this guy from prison. 21 years, though. God almighty. That's right, rape culture. I forgot. According to the Feminists, right? The Pentagon released a study in January that found the number of unreported sexual assaults at the 3 American military academies spiked 50% to 747 during the 2017-2018 academic year. Let me unpack this a little bit for you. Unreported sexual assaults. Now, you're not supposed to realize that a sexual assault is or can be a grope, unwanted hug, unwanted kiss, slap on the ass, even a handshake, I suppose, could be considered a sexual assault. What they want you to believe is that the number of rapes has spiked 50%. Absolutely not true. They don't give you that data. And there are reasons for that. For you see, reported cases of sexual assault, which I will almost guarantee are all rape, increased only slightly in the same time period. Still, far too many, 117 rapes. Yeah, that's bad. We need to get those guys in prison when they're convicted with evidence. So again, another story trying to convince us, whether they're writing it that way or not, that sexual assault is in fact rape. It is not. Links will be below. Go ahead and read. There's a bunch of stories on this, but again, perhaps another victory for men. James Maxwell, thank you for listening.